it be great if everybody was remarkable? But there's great nuance in that word, because the best synonym for remarkable is not exceptional. And so if you're just chasing exceptional, most people are going to admit there's nothing that exceptional. There's nothing that great about my copier or my ranch dressing or my pair of jeans. Therefore, I'm not cult-like. And then they dismiss themselves because they haven't achieved this perception of they're exceptional, so much that they're Tesla or that they're Apple, right? And that's not the best synonym for remarkability. The best synonym for remarkability is notable, or sometimes use today's vernacular, buzzworthy. And it really goes to the root of the word remarkable, which is to remark. And what cult brands are very intentional about is that they're very strategic, maybe even manipulative, but I use that word in a positive way, about getting people to think and say very specific things about your brand, and that they grow disproportionately by harnessing and managing this word of mouth. So, when done perfectly, you get the Teslas and the Costcos and the TikToks of the world that achieve billions in sales with literally zero money spent on paid advertising, because they're so remarkable. So many people are talking about them all the time. They don't need to waste margin on advertising. They're already getting the awareness and the acquisition through the voice of their customers. Now, those are exceptions, but there's dozens, if not hundreds, of brands that are reaping benefits of word of mouth by being more remarkable than their mediocre peers in their category. And I'm concerned that if you're thinking that an indicator of your remarkability is somebody answering, yes, I'm likely to refer this business to somebody else, that you're being fooled, and that you've got this sort of false sense of security. Because as we hope to show you, what people say on their Net Promoter Score is hardly at all correlated with what they're actually doing in terms of actually referring people and letting businesses reap the benefits of advocacy and word of mouth. And so I'm not the only one that has a hard time with this. I might be a bit more obnoxious in how I proclaim my disdain for the current state, but there is growing concern, just given the pervasiveness of Net Promoter Score within certainly the Fortune 1000. I think the data says 2/3 of the Fortune 1000 are Net Promoter Score customers, but they're using that metric incorrectly. They're using it, what should be a customer satisfaction metric, which I would argue is kind of irrelevant, and they're using it as a proxy for customer engagement, or worse, brand health. And so when we counsel with these CEOs or these CMOs, sometimes they go so far as to try to rationalize how cult capable their business is. And I don't mean cult like they're worthy of working with my agency. That's not the point. I mean worthy of having a cult-like following, whether that be employees or customers, by bragging about a high Net Promoter Score. And that's a very big problem because of how poorly correlated Net Promoter Scores are with the things that we've learned actually matter in terms of affinity or ideally advocacy. So we've really been doing the best that we can ever since to set this record straight and to ideally demonstrate alternatives so that organizations can implement better strategies that will more positively impact their customer experience, so they can actually get what they think they're getting by chasing a high Net Promoter Score. So in order to sort of help us decode this or decouple this mess that we've sort of gotten ourselves into, I thought it might be helpful just to go back to the beginning just briefly. I don't want to bore you with too much of a history lesson here, but here's a little nugget for you. I find that if your brand is kind of going astray, if things are not as good as you would like them to be, there's great wisdom to be found in origin stories, going back to the beginning, to a simpler time, and trying to then reverse engineer, where did we go wrong? Where did we start to lose our course of direction? And there's many business leaders who swear by NPS, who are, vocal defenders of it. There's many organizations who are even compensating their leadership team based on improvements to NPS, who, when you say why did this metric become so important to your organization? Or worse, if you say, do you even know what that metric is actually measuring? They say no. And so they've just taken for granted. It's become so, it's kind of like the purchase funnel, which is a webinar for another day, but there's these constructs that have become so popular, we just accept them as truth without asking critical questions of them. And so let's go back to the beginning about what Net Promoter kind of actually was in the early days. So this guy here on the left is Fred. I don't actually know how to pronounce his last name. Reichheld, I believe. I believe that Fred is a good guy. I don't believe that he's malicious or intent on deceiving people. He's actually probably really, really smart. Fred was an employee of Bain and Company. Sometimes we talk to people and they think that Net Promoter Score was almost like a scientific discovery, that it sort of emerged as a proven theory like the laws of gravity or the theory of relativity. It's not, it's a product. Bain invented it as a way to sell something to customers, which is fine. I'm not against Bain making money, but let's not think there's something altruistic going on here. Bain was trying to grow its consulting practice. Fred had an idea that Bain said, ooh, good idea. We can make a lot of money on that. And Fred's good idea had everything to do with customer satisfaction surveys suck. They had all sorts of evidence that would suggest that their clients who were doing a lot of energy on customer satisfaction were not winning. They were not dominating their category. The data was largely useless. And so they set out to create a better mousetrap. And when Fred worked with another company called I don't even know how to pronounce this either, Symmetrics, Greg, any help? You don't know. Get yourself off mute and chime in here.
I mean, like, if I'm just reading the characters on screen, it's Satmetrics, but maybe there's some nuance there that I'm not aware of.
Symmetrics kind of became forgotten through this whole thing. Bain got a lot more cachet and revenue, I think, as a result. But this three-headed dragon went about trying to say, if satisfaction metrics are poor proxies for financial outcomes or for predicting customer behavior, then let's come up with a better way. And what Fred was particularly motivated by was speed. He said, even if you're asking good questions, the fact that you send a survey a week after the sale, and then it takes a month for some data and analytics team to cull the data and package it in a report that then gets presented to some executive, like the damage is already done. He wanted to get as close to as real time as possible. So what you're seeing like today with other organizations like Qualtrics comes to mind, their goal is to say before the customer leaves the restaurant, before the person leaves the dealership, you're getting an indicator of are they happy or not, right? So Fred was focused on speed. And he said, well, if speed is paramount, then the best thing that we should do is simplify the survey. Create a survey that doesn't have to be sent after the fact. It could be sent right there at the register or while the call center person is on the phone. And if customers aren't complying because they don't want to take a 5-minute survey after a phone call, what if we made it super simple? Which was, what if there was one question to rule them all? Right? This is like Lord of the Rings stuff going on. So they started testing one question. They referred to it as the ultimate question that would get us more directionally close to indicate whether or not the person had a good experience. So what you could do with that information is you could follow up with operational improvements, so that you could find if there was a store or a store manager or an employee or a region that was getting particularly lower scores, then you could more immediately go in and fix it. You could say you need to smile more, you need to say more please and thank yous, you need to button up your shirt, whatever, like really practical things, clean the washrooms out, like What are the indicators that would say the customer was not thrilled with the way that that happens, so that we can instantaneously interject and improve that situation? So it was a compliance metric more than anything else about, are our operators that are having customer interactions living up to the expectations that we've set for them? And the customers that indicate 9 or 10 on that rating score were more likely to be compliant, and the whatever employees, locations, dealerships that weren't doing well, we could go in and send in a regional manager and fix it. That was the origin. That's what they were trying to do. And what we've misunderstood that to be is that if I say, if I give McDonald's a 9, or a 10, it was the cheeseburger was hot, the fries were delicious as they always are, and the Diet Coke was better than anybody else's Diet Coke because they're doing something with their fountains that I don't even care if it's illegal, it's delicious. Like, it's just a better product. That doesn't mean I'm now going home and raving about McDonald's to my friends and family, right? It doesn't even mean I'm going to go back to McDonald's. It simply means for the time that I was there, they did what I expected them to do. But if Wendy's wants to tempt me with their new French fry, which they have, I'll go check them out. If Fat Burger wants to tempt me with a better bacon cheeseburger, I'll go check them out. And so as long as people understand and call a spade, and you still want to use it, God bless you. Again, I'm not anti-Net Promoter Score. I'm just anti the confusion that people think they're measuring one thing when in reality, they're measuring another. And there's lots of data that has proven that since its release in 2003, that's when Net Promoter Score was sort of published, people have been very skeptical about this intentionality. Because again, that question says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer? And people think that means if I said 10, I am referring. And they actually aren't. And that's true with most types of surveys. Rarely do people actually do what they say or say what they do. And so Net Promoter isn't unique in that situation. What's unique is that so many organizations have now put that as sort of the ultimate goal, is let's get a 9 or a 10 on that survey. And really what it's best at is it's simplicity. It's just so damn easy to do. But I think that that's a problem. It's a problem with something like, even take a different category, programmatic digital media buying. Programmatic digital media buying sucks. It doesn't actually produce good results, but media agencies and practitioners have made it so easy that they've lulled us into this sense of, well, it may not be effective, but it's certainly efficient, right? But we have to be very careful that we don't ever let the efficiency trump the effectiveness. And so Greg's going to share with you some facts about alternatives in terms of making NPS better. Like, if we were to start over again, what would we do? I think I want to just end my little section with this thought of, if we can accept the fact that I would be willing to do something a little bit harder, that there isn't one such thing as one question to answer everything I need to know about the health of my business, then what might you do? Now, NPS, Bain, who owns NPS, knows this. They know that the one question fallacy is in fact false. This is a slide from their website that talks about, they don't even really sell NPS scores anymore. They sell, I didn't change the slide. They sell NPS systems, right? So if you take the one advantage that NPS had, which was, well, at least it's easy. They, by their own admission, are saying, well, but if you need to have something that's accurate or beneficial, you can't use a score. You have to have a whole system that's going to include benchmarking and additional tools and alternative questions and different frameworks. And you probably need some Bain consultants to come in and show you how to actually use it and interpret it properly. So, like, you know, go to the Bain website to this day, and you won't see them selling NPS as S equals score. They sell NPS as S equals systems. And I think it's a bit of smoke and mirrors. It's kind of like, oh, yes, they've read the literature, they've seen the academic studies, they've learned that it's not what they thought it was or what they proclaimed it to be. So they had to make it better, but they still call it NPS so that people don't freak out and fire them and go choose other options. The other thing about, I forgot to mention, the simplicity factor has been grossly gamified. And I've got to imagine I'm not the only one here that's had this experience, but I was at, I think, Ace Hardware, some hardware store recently. I needed to buy a snowblower. And I bought the snowblower, and the associate, I don't know, spent 5 minutes helping me get the snowblower, and then spent another 5 minutes begging me to give him a 10 on the Net Promoter Survey that was going to be asked when I checked out, because his kid needs to go to college. And if I don't give him a 10, he's going to get fired, and I'm going to be responsible for his family becoming destitute, right? It was this heavy-handed, uncomfortable, please, if there's anything I need to do right now to make this situation so that you're going to give me a 10. And that became a way to gamify it. You've got other organizations that are heavily incentivizing increases to Net Promoter Scores, not even in administering the survey to customers they know didn't have a positive experience. So it's just, it's so fundamentally flawed in its execution that I just get worried, like, what is this data even telling us? It's telling us that some of the people who have done business with you some of the time and had a particularly good experience are willing to fill out a brief questionnaire that you're now bonusing your executive C-suite on. It's kind of asinine when you label it to that sort of level of hyperbole. So I want to just wrap up my little portion by talking about 3 types of people that are probably on this phone call today. And I'm using Net Promoter Score language as my example. So the best Net Promoter Score scorers are referred to as promoters. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for how many people that you sent that survey to gave you a 9 or a 10, and they call them promoters. People who, I believe there are people who claim to be very big fans of Net Promoter Score. They claim that they have seen great correlation and great benefits from it. I actually would like to talk with you offline to understand that, because I see 10 times more negative examples than positive ones. And when I find out why they're such fans of it, most of the time it's they have learned how to manipulate it. Well, they don't want to rock the boat. They're the ones that are getting the bonuses based on growing Net Promoter Score. They have figured out how to gamify the system, and they want me to shut up so that their organization doesn't change their bonus structure, because they're succeeding at getting the Net Promoter Score to rise, even if their business performance is declining. And this whole thing came to my attention 7 or 8 years ago at the gathering. We had a professor from University of North Carolina that took all of her graduate MBA students, and she had some cheap labor, some manpower to go off and do some correlations between sales performance and Net Promoter Score performance, and came back and said there's no correlation. In fact, I think that might be my next slide. This isn't her work. This is a much more recent study. This was published in July of last year. The study that I was referring to from North Carolina was like from 2011 or 2012, something like that. But look at the punchline of this abstract, right? Only the more recently developed brand health metrics of a Net Promoter Score, and again, that's not Net Promoter Score, that's Net Promoter System now, sneaky, that uses all potential customer samples, because that's one of the flaws with Net Promoter Scores, is that you're only asking customers, not prospects, is effective at predicting future growth sales. Basically saying all previous attempts of using the old Net Promoter Score were not effective at predicting future sales growth, which is what people thought they were doing, is if we can somehow increase our Net Promoter Score, we're going to somehow get more sales. So that would be the first group, right? There are promoters. I hope that you would leave this this webinar here in a half hour asking some tougher questions and being a little bit more honest about, is it as effective as you think it actually is? Then you have this other group that is just, I call them the passives. Well, I don't call them that Net Promoter Score. It calls the middle group. I think they give you a 7 or an 8 on the score. I mean, I never really thought about it. The passives represent the largest group. My guess is 70% of the attendees on this webinar are passives. Sometimes I refer to them as being blissfully indifferent, right? I simply came into this company and the company uses Net Promoter Score. That's what their culture has prioritized. And who am I to say anything different, right? So you just learn to comply. You don't really ask a lot of tough questions because you don't really want to rock the boat. You're just assuming someone at some time did something sufficient, did some due diligence to decide if this was a good idea or not. And you're here now simply picking up what they left off and you're doing what you're told. That, that's fine. Not everybody has to be a bull in a china shop and rock every boat, but I would hope a handful of you would wake up and go ask some really tough questions and maybe motivate your organization to change, because it can do a lot of harm. You can start to really micromanage your Net Promoter Score KPIs in a way that is doing nothing for the health of your business. I don't think it's going to necessarily do anything bad for your business, but you're spending a lot of finite, precious resources on things that aren't going to be producing the bang for the buck that you thought you were getting. And then lastly, there's the detractors in Net Promoter Score parlance. The detractors are people who, like me and Greg, have grown disenfranchised with Net Promoter, and we're just eager for something else. It's just maybe they don't know where to look. They don't know what else is out there. And so that's what we want to kind of expose you to, is to help you see that there are things with better correlations. The last thing that I want to say is, even if you just want something that's simple, even if you believe that it's more predictable of your sales or more correlated with your business performance than I'm saying it is, nobody can dispute the biggest problem with Net Promoter Score is that it's not prescriptive. There's no insight. If your score is going up or down, you're still left to do all of the hard work of what should I now do? Or what was I doing that made it go up? And you have to start looking at all of the other variables. And so you're still left to do all the heavy lifting. And wouldn't it be great if there was some diagnostic tool that was a little bit more helpful, saying, why don't you spend more time and energy in this area and a little bit less time or energy in that area, right? So when we look at data analytics of things that are descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, or prescriptive, Net Promoter Score is none of that, right? And so it begs the question, well, what are you doing with those improvements besides issuing bonuses? Are you doubling down on whatever marketing activity you had invested in that past quarter or in that past year, assuming that, well, let's just keep doing that because the score went up? So I would encourage you to say, just like Net Promoter is doing with their system, by asking just a couple more questions, you're going to get a lot more directionally accurate insights into, oh, this is what the customers are actually really digging right now, or, oh, this is the thing that they don't seem to appreciate as much anymore, so that you can be far more productive at doing something that's actually going to make a difference. So let me get off the soapbox, hand it over to Greg, and I'd love Greg to kind of introduce you to what if there was a better way.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us today and sharing some of this time with us. So I'm going to try to get through the sort of second half of this fairly quickly so we can get to some questions. I know that Amy's let us know that the questions are starting to pour in here a little bit. So, but part of when we sought out to understand, well, if NPS has these downfalls and these flaws, like let's get to the bottom of why. Chris, you can go back to the slide if you can. Like why and how are people making decisions? And NPS does I don't even say a good job. It does a job at saying whether you're going to recommend something, and customer satisfaction surveys do a good job of saying, did you enjoy a product? But we don't really know why and how decisions are being made. And I'm not going to go too deep into behavioral science on this next sort of 5 or 6 minutes. But when you look at decision theory, we've historically spent a lot of time thinking about normative decision theory, which means we're analyzing the outcomes of decisions. That's mostly where your Prism 5s and your sort of broadly available demographic, psychographic profiling has all existed in, like, why or how did a decision get made? Where we started to look at with our partners at a group called Normative, who's a super talented team of researchers, we're more at optimal decision theory, which is the investigation and analysis of why individuals made the decisions that they made. And as we dug into that and we started to get smarter on that type of literature, the punchline really is that 95 or more % of decisions are made emotionally and then rationalized after. And as human beings, and if any of you has a significant other, or a mother, a father, or a sibling, it's like super hard to communicate your feelings, right? You can't just ask you, why did you buy something? Because the moment that we do, you start to rationalize. It was the price point, or was this, or was functional benefits, less than these sort of more emotive or feeling and emotional based reasons. And so we sought to understand that. What are the attitudes, the feelings, and the beliefs that lead to behaviors? Again, that optimal decision theory idea. And so we tried to concoct our own metric or survey around how do we get to the bottom of that in a way that isn't, to Chris's point, which was one of the bigger benefits of NPS. We're not sending a survey away for months or weeks and then going into an analysis mode. We tried to figure out what's the best way to get to some of this more emotional level of detail and how decisions get made to get to that better understanding. And so, Chris, to the next slide there's really three things. That was the challenge. It needs to be more predictive, right? So getting an understanding of what's likely to happen if we make changes. Again, NPS does a tough job in doing that. We don't really know how our score is made up or what it's made up of. So how can we understand how we can impact it, right? Beyond Chris's example of the guy at Ace Hardware, and for those of you who don't know Chris, he probably gave him a 2 or a 3 on his NPS just to watch the world burn around him. But it does a bad job. Like we don't know how it's being administered, or it's being administered in a handful of not deceptive but black hat or trickier ways to sort of game the system. More prescriptive being the second point. We don't know what the ingredients of your NPS score are, or of your customer satisfaction score. If you just simply ask somebody, were you satisfied with your goods or services? If you get a yes or a 5 or a 1, you don't know why. We don't know how that's being made up, what your score is being made up of. So let's say hypothetically you have a really bad NPS score. You actually it doesn't tell you how to fix it. You can guess and you can try different things, but it's not going to actually inform any real logical input that you can create into improving your score. And the last piece is that of easily administered. We've talked about this a lot today. Time is of the essence, and there's no time like that moment of interaction or that sort of moment of purchase or that moment of experience to get as pure of an answer or response from some of your audiences. And so we've developed what we call an audience engagement score, which really serves to give us an understanding of how beloved are you, what are people's expectations of you as an organization, and how are you living up to those things. We refer to what's called the levers of loyalty. Those are the ingredients. There's 16 attitudes that can map directly to how somebody feels about you and how likely they are to shop you again or recommend you to their friends and peers. And this audience engagement score is made up of 3 sort of factors. Chris, on to the next slide. First and foremost are these attitudinal drivers. So what are those actual feelings and emotions that are helping people make decisions about you or find interest in you or find reasons to talk about you? How are we indexing against the desired behaviors, those being how willing are people to shop you when they need you again, and how willing or likely are people to talk about you when the need or the opportunity arises. In the last part, and Chris alluded to the cult brand principles, and I'm not exactly sure who all is on this call or how familiar you are with the cult brand principles. Cult over the last decade has spent a lot of time sort of reverse engineering the attributes and the traits and behaviors of some of the world's most beloved brands to get a sense of, well, what are they doing so differently than their mediocre peers? Why is it that Harley Davidson gets to spend 15% of their advertising and marketing budget on paid media, and the rest of it is goes into nurturing their existing audience and riders. Why do they get to do that when the rest of us are spending 70% plus on acquiring new customers or building awareness in markets? So those 8 call parameters, we'll get to them in a second. Those play an important factor in determining your audience engagement score, to say, of the things, of the behaviors, of the traits that we know lead to above average levels of affinity and engagement, what are the most important of those factors to your audiences? We hear a lot about having a purpose, or, Patagonia, sort of the sort of sacred cow and purpose-led brands. It's like, well, that works really well for Patagonia, but if you are an insurance company, do people even really care if you have a purpose? Maybe not. Maybe it matters to your staff, but not to your customers. So it helps us focus what we're putting our time and effort into in this massive world of acquisition and awareness and consideration, and try to move people up and down funnels and through loyalty loops and all those things. It helps give you a little bit more guidance as to what those things are. And so we can jump to the next slide. We'll just talk quickly on what these feelings and beliefs are. These are the 16 factors, the feelings on the left-hand side and the beliefs that we can ask, that we ask audiences, 2 really key audiences. One, what we call is your predominant audience, so somebody who's really loyal to you, who shops you, and an opportunity audience is the people that at an attitudinal level most closely relate to that audience. They're just not customers yet. But we get to the bottom of these things, and how do they feel about you? Talking about purpose or being dependable or being honest or empathetic. We all think, because we read blogs and we read news clippings, that people need empathetic or relatable or honest or purpose-led brands. We all think that because it's very vogue, but that's not appropriate for everybody. Of these 16 factors that we see on screen, these are expectations, needs, and expectations that a customer may have on your brand or your organization. These aren't all created equal. Some of these things are irrelevant. Some of these things don't matter in your construct, but how would we know that if we can't get to the bottom of it through something like an audience engagement score, much less through something like the NTS? And so we don't go out and ask people, is dealing with Porsche joyful? People don't have a hard time relating to what joyful means. Joyful means something different to everybody else. And so we'll ask something along the lines of, dealing with Porsche always puts a smile on my face. And that's a proxy for your product experience, your service experience, all those types of things. And so that's where in a 3-minute survey, we can get to the understanding of these different factors. The next part beyond the attitudinal drivers is that of the actual behavioral drivers. And this is where with a very, very simple question, we can understand, okay, well, are you ready to readily encourage others to use your company for the products and services they provide? And do you actually plan on shopping this again? That's sort of the big piece. And Neelan referred to he loves a Lamborghini, and he'd recommend it to anybody that he knows. But Chris doesn't drive a Lamborghini, so he may give Lamborghini a great
Ferrari
NPS score. Oh, right, yeah. Chris drives 2 Ferraris at the same time. So you might get a really good advocacy score in the sense of, like, I would encourage people to buy a Lamborghini. But that doesn't mean that you're actually prepared to actually own one or purchase one. So what good is that at the end of the day if people are talking about your brand and recommending your brand, but they're not actually able to or willing to actually engage or purchase with it? So it is a bit of a misnomer, or can be misleading. And the last part that we'll end on before we try to get into a bit of maybe Q&A, and I don't know, Chris, if you want to jump through a case example or something along those lines. We look at the cult brand principle, this being sort of the last part of the trifecta inside the audience engagement score. And again, for a webinar for a different day, these are the 8 traits based on a decade's worth of research that cult brands exhibit better than their peers. This idea of co-creation, so bringing customers into the fold, making them part of product development, service experiences, things of that nature. Being remarkable, Chris touched on. Building from the inside out, more of an internal culture, position, having purpose, congregate, so finding ways to get your customers to get together, picking a fight, poking somebody in the eye, being through a challenger mindset or something along those lines, and then being relatable and creating rites and rituals. I'm just trying to zip through here so we can get some Q&A as well. But the reason that we love the audience engagement score is because we know that highly engaged brands see two really key things. From a benefit standpoint, above average brand attachment. That's the study that Chris referred to as in that early 2010 study. Above average word of mouth. They'll have to spend less on traditional advertising. That's the Harley Davidson example. Higher than industry average margins because they have to discount less because there's just a deeper level of engagement there, and heightened internal engagement. People want to work for you more, which means they want to work harder for you and do better by your cause. From a very functional performance standpoint, these numbers aren't, hand to God, aren't made up, and we can show you the back on them. The brands that score in the 80th to 90th percentile in their audience engagement score. So the ones that are engaging, doing the best, absolute best jobs of tapping into their customers' attitudes, get to reap the rewards where customers will spend 6 times more time on branded web and social properties. They're going to click on 9 times more of your ads. They're going to spend, this is a real number, 76 times more on advertised products and services, and are 6 times more likely to increase monthly in-store purchases. That's science and of a body of work over the last 6 or 7 years of the highest and best engaging brands. And so when we can say, you know, your audience engagement score sits at a 45 of a total 76, if you can move that 45 into 60 or even 55 to 65, these are the types of things that we're going to start to see, both from a benefit standpoint and from a performance standpoint. And those are just direct lines that we can draw into actual business performance based on real metrics rooted in behavioral science versus a really short and efficient scoring metric that doesn't really give us much insight beyond or correlates to any real business performance. And so that's where we've arrived with the audience engagement score. That's why we love this metric, and that's why it becomes sort of table stakes for any client that does engage with us. Like we have to understand the attitudinal drivers of your audiences, or for all intents and purposes, you're kind of just wasting your money. People don't make decisions based on their demographics, short of like healthcare as they age out of private health insurance. People don't age out of, people don't age out of loving your brand. It's not like when we all turn 40, we stop loving the brands and we stop watching Marvel movies. We know that's not true. And so this is where we try to drive most of our effort, most of our emphasis is in getting these types of outcomes through the audience engagement score. Now, Chris, I know that we have 13 minutes left here. Do you want to maybe talk through that first example, or do you want to just jump to some Q&A?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We have a couple of case studies if people are curious about that. Let me wrap it officially by saying this isn't us. This is Gartner saying that the bloom is sort of off the rose here. But more than 75% of organizations are predicted to abandon NPS as their metric for success, for customer service and success by 2025. So we're anticipating more and more people have recognized that it's overpromised and underdelivered for far too long. And we want to encourage you to seek alternatives as well, because like I said, it's not like bad things are happening by trying to improve your score. It's just that you're using precious resources to focus on things that are irrelevant. And we'd rather see you put that money into things that matter. And if you are looking for an alternative metric, certainly the shameless plug would be please learn more about our audience engagement score. And a big shout out to Emotive Technologies, who's on the call here today, that's helping us create that and make, they're the ones with the PhDs and the statisticians that know how to actually make it work. We're just trying to help organizations prioritize customer-centric thinking and to become more cult-like. And you need a KPI that the C-suite is chasing in order to do so. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can hopefully see some faces. Amy, I'll turn it back over to you. to ask some questions, and we'll see if anybody wants to hear one of those case studies or not.
Sure. Thank you to you both. I'll go ahead and start by answering some of the questions that came in before the session. But as a reminder, if you do have any questions that weren't answered, please feel free to put them in the chat box. So the first one that came in is, what are the primary differences that make each measure relevant to an organization? And I'm believing that measurement is referring to NPS versus engagement scoring.
Yeah, so hopefully we beat that. I mean, that was asked before they sat through 45 minutes of our ranting. Hopefully the takeaways are, while maintaining a high degree of simplicity and speed, which is Net Promoter Score's strength, how do we create metrics that are more predictable and predictive of behavior that will actually result in advocacy and better business KPIs?
Okay. What is considered a good AES score? Can you compare that across one industry?
No, that's another, actually Net Promoter Score does a pretty good job of giving you competitive benchmarks that are within your category, assuming you're paying for that incremental service from Bain. But it's really a fallacy. And we run into this all the time with The Gathering as well. It's tough to say, you know, Marvel is the most cult-like brand of 2022 because Marvel's in the entertainment and movie business, right? How does that relate to blue jeans, hamburgers, and automotive? So you have to have your score comparative to the category in which you compete. So Greg doesn't even realize it, but he had mentioned something about if your score is 45 and the potential is 76, right? That's saying, you know, yes, the ideal would be 100, but within your category, the potential for you to get an A would be a 76, right? So don't think of it as a C like in high school, but think of it as the brands that are best living up to the consumer's highest expectations for your category was a 76, and you're now currently at a 45. Therefore, you have 30 points of improvement. So part of the brilliance, I think, of AES versus NPS at the base model is just asking about your customers. You at least want the competitive intelligence, and ideally you want prospects as well. So Greg also sort of casually referenced predominant and opportunity customers. It's nice to know what your best customers think of you, but isn't it even better to know what the customers that should be your best customers are thinking of you? And if they're not in their store enough, you're not even administering an NPS to them. And so every category has their own sort of what good looks like. Every business is going to get its own score, and then you'll create action plans to sort of close that gap between your current and your desired state.
Okay. Can you provide an example?
That was the question. Full stop.
That was a question.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. So this
an easily administered question.
Oh, provide an example of the question, or provide example of a brand using AES?
I think it's referring to a brand using AES.
Yeah. So this is the example that I'll share that of a casual dining client. Now, for those of you who are in the food service space, you know, casual dining has been having a slow, painful death for over a decade now, as fast casual has sort of become the most vogue thing. But this is a sit-down restaurant that if I was to tell you your name, not only would you know it, my guess is you've eaten there in the past quarter. Very popular, one of North America's largest. And they have a very sophisticated, robust, in-house consumer insights and analytics team, multiple employees, a 7-figure annual budget. They do real-time surveying after you've paid your bill. They prided themselves on how much data that they had about their consumers. The problem was they asked 2 types of questions. One, satisfaction questions, like was the meal hot? Were the fries crispy? Did you get your refills on time? And competitive questions. When thinking about going out next, would you go to us versus, you know, Olive Garden or TGI Fridays? An example of 2 of their competitors that gives you a better clue who the client was. So those are useful pieces of information, but they're not the most important piece of information. The most important piece of information is, what did it take to get you to come back here more often and spend more money and buy stuff at full price? So I don't have to bribe you with discounts and coupons and free drinks. And those surveys that they were administering had nothing to do with how people were feeling, thinking, and what the attitudinal drivers were about the brand and that experience, other than, yes, the washroom was clean or the drinks were cold. And so we were able to insert new questions. It added about 2.5 minutes to the survey process. It was administered through the exact same vehicles that they were using before. They kept with their mediocre satisfaction and NPS stuff because they were skeptical. So we're like, fine, keep. And they also had a lot of historical data. So even if it's wrong, it's at least directionally wrong, so they can understand if there's improvement. So it was all additive. It wasn't like out with the old, in with the new. We added 2 new questions to their existing survey. And it unveiled a treasure trove of information about one audience in particular, that a segment of audience that had the high potential to come back on a monthly basis, that wasn't coming back for 3 very specific reasons, where the strategy team and the marketing team can now simply say, let's just simply remove those 3 barriers. Let's communicate our priority for that customer segment, and then start to reap the advantages of that. Now, to be fully transparent, COVID hit 3 months later and decimated the majority of casual dining experiences. But I loved the fact that now that they're rebounding, they know exactly how to spend their finite dollars on 3 things that were never revealed through their previous heavy investment in consumer insights.
Thank you. Just being mindful of time, I think the rest of the questions were probably answered within the discussion. So, of course, if anything wasn't answered, please feel free to reach out. But I'm going to take this time to thank everybody for joining us today. As mentioned, a copy of this recording will be sent out and will also be available on our website at cultideas.com/webinars, along with some other pre-recorded sessions that we have on there. So yeah, we really appreciate you all being here today with us. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion, and we hope to see you at our next one.
Thank you,
Final
everybody.
words, gentlemen?
No, thanks. Everyone be safe.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate the
Thanks for
time.
Thank you.